Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Six3nine Education Podcast. This episode we are going to be talking all things menstrual cycle, and I'm joined by a colleague, Six3nine trainer and Six3nine Education team member, Kerry Clark. Hello, Kerry.
Hey, hey.
As I said already, we're going to be touching on menstrual cycle. We're going to be having a look at what Kerry has been reading about. Why this might be quite an interesting topic for coaches, the kind of thing that it impacts. We'll have a little delve into how it might impact the athletic world, athletic populations, and how you as a coach can benefit from learning a little bit more about it. I am very keen to get into this and excited to learn a bit more from what you've been looking at, Kerry. So I guess we'll start with you. It's an interesting topic. It's a topic that affects everyone, I think, but particularly 50% of the population.
Yeah.
I guess, how did you kind of get started, get interested in this topic? Is it as a coach? Is it as a female? Is it both?
So it was listening to, I listened to a few podcasts. I was listening to one by Dr. Hazel Wallace. So she's a doctor, and she has a few guests that come onto her podcast to discuss different topics. And there's a few that I listened to that just got me quite interested in the topics and delving into it a bit more. So one that I listened to was all about amenorrhea, which is where your periods stop, but I'll mention that a little bit more later on. And then just discussing, another one was with Dr. Stacey Sims, who has done a lot of research on why you should train females slightly differently, or just bear in mind different things that will impact the female body that obviously men don't have. And then I just sparked interest in my own, like with myself, not even just thinking about it from a client perspective, but I realized how much I didn't know about my body. It's just quite interesting, even talk about things like mood swings and realizing, oh, actually that might be why I cried in the gym that time, or just like little things that I actually realized about myself. And that led me into tracking my menstrual cycle a bit more, and then just seeing trends like, oh yeah, no, I do feel stronger during this phase. And I just think it's really important. It's a bit of a taboo subject, despite it affecting like 50% of the population, but people don't really talk about it that much. Like even between my friends, it's something that now I have started bringing into conversation. But it's not just me, that I wasn't the only one that didn't know that much about it. Like quite a few people, like when I asked my friends, oh, did you know this? They're like, oh no. It's like, okay, this is stuff that we should know. Like this is happening to our body like month for month. And it's actually amazing that we're not aware of these things. And then from a coach's point of view, if these things are affecting someone's mood, how strong they're feeling, obviously that's going to have a massive impact on their training. So that's why I got interested in the topic.
And it's an enormous topic as well, isn't it? I mean, it rolls into, I mean, you've already mentioned amenorrhea and some of the issues that can happen if the cycle is disrupted. I guess sort of, you've got understanding what a normal cycle even is, and then then what happens if it's disrupted, and what can you do to, there's just so many questions that come out of this topic. It seems like having a conversation about it is a really good step in the right direction to making sure that people are more comfortable talking about this as a topic, because as you say, it's something that not everybody is massively comfortable talking about, but it's something that affects a huge amount of the population. How did you, what did you learn that you were not sort of already aware of? What's the useful bits that you picked up that you think, because you've already mentioned a couple there, like the effect on training at different times and that kind of stuff. What was the original stuff that you learned that you thought, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know that?
I guess just learning when you feel stronger during your cycle. So this is, I think I've cried twice at 639, which like now I'm like, oh, that's embarrassing. But when like at the time, I think I was just throwing a bit of a strop, and I was like, oh, I'm so weak, I can't do this, why am I so shit? And just having one of those days where like everything is wrong, and being like, oh, I could do this last week, why am I so bad? And then now looking back, I was like, one, thinking now it's silly, but at the time, like, it wasn't. But now being like, oh, well, that makes sense, because of the time that you were in, you're not going to feel strong, you are going to be in, like, you won't be in a very good mood. So just knowing, if I knew that then, I could then look back and be like, oh, well, cut yourself a bit of slack, give yourself a week, and then you'll be into a better stage of your cycle. So the first 2 weeks are when, so in your follicular stage, which is the first stage, so this is like average cycle is 28 days, but I think it's 21 to 35 days, so it's just like what is normal for you. But in the first half, this is where women show increased levels of strength, and around ovulation is when strength has been found to be a lot higher. So if you're going for a PB in the gym, this would be a good time. And if you're in the Olympics and your event falls around that time, then obviously it's more advantageous and you might perform better, as opposed to if you were at the later stage of your luteal phase, where strength tends to decrease. Your moods are definitely not as great, as I can definitely, I definitely feel that quite a bit. So yeah, it's just knowing, like for me, just now I can cut myself a bit of slack if I'm not feeling as strong, and instead of throwing a strop and feeling really down, like I'm a failure, just be like, oh, okay, just like how much your hormones have an impact. And I think, males are generally pretty equal throughout the month, but yeah, and it's just like, I just thought at the age of 26, like I didn't know that it would have that much of an impact. And listening to it, I was like, oh wow, like how did I not know that? And I guess like from a coach's point of view, why that's really important is, if I'm not one of the coaches that would like, not very like drill sergeant at all, but if you are like, come on, do this, and then your client's there like, oh, but it's hard, and you're like, well, you did this last week, you can do this again, and they're feeling shit, they don't have as much strength, then it's not like, you're not going to have a great client buy-in from that.
Yeah, massively. I mean, how did you go about, obviously you understand, you've obviously learned that there are these kind of different phases and they have particular impacts on performance, but how do you go about actually tracking that? If I'm either working with a female client, or if you're, if a female's listening to this and they're like, well, I don't know, I need to be able to track these things. Are there ways in which you can, different ways in which you can keep a track of what's happening?
Yeah, so when I was having a look at this, there's 2 apps that I've been using, but there's quite a few. There's one called Clue that I've heard that's quite good. There's one called Flow, and it also comes up with tips, but one that is quite good, because this is more training specific, it's called FITR Woman, FITR Woman. And in this one, I think this is really good, because you can track what phase you're in, and then it just gives you little tips. And in terms of training, so this is, so if you click on like the first phase at the start of your follicular phase at the beginning, so say training tip throughout this phase, max training may benefit from HIIT and strength training. And then it just gives you like different tips. So inflammation and recovery, an increase in inflammation may mean that it takes a bit longer to recover from exercise, so focus on recovery during this phase is important. So it just gives you different tips, and I think that's quite good. Also nutrition tips, so it can tell you when it might be more beneficial to stock up on carbs, or in the later phase, in the luteal phase, your body actually requires more calories. I think it's like 200 to 300 2 to 300 more calories a day, not times, that would be a lot more, that your body requires. And that might sound great, like, oh great, my body's going to be burning more, so if you're on a diet this might sound like great, but it is so hard. And studies have been doing have shown that women, it's really hard to go against these cravings, because your body needs those extra calories because of all the work that it's doing, and it's actually really hard to not fuel those. So yeah, it's just like very interesting, the different phases and how they affect lots of different things, including your strength and nutrition.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess with hormones, there is a very solid argument that hormones will have such a major impact on behavior, and the way that we feel. You know, just kind of hormones impacting mood and emotion and that kind of stuff, but as well as behavior. So yeah, sort of that subconscious sort of reaching for extra carbs, or the ice cream looks irresistible at certain times of the month. And it's not, you know, and we talk about the rest of the time about managing your hormones with sleep and rest and these kind of things. So is this hormonal sort of cycle, is that affected by things like birth control, pills? You know, is that getting the right pill, is that important? You know, there are different options there as well, because that can presumably play a pretty major role.
Yeah, so I've done a bit of reading about this. So the article that I've written about is more if you're not taking, so it's without taking birth control, that will impact your cycle, because then this is where I don't know as much about how birth control affects it. But I was reading the other day, it's actually the Gyna Geeks book that I found really interesting, and it was just talking about PMS, and then there's another one that's like the next level to PMS, which is where people suffer a lot worse. I can't remember what it stands. It's a PMDD. I'm not sure, but it's like where levels are a lot worse and it's more extreme. And I know in there it did say that you could then go onto a contraceptive pill, which can alter your hormone regulation. So I think you can, but that's definitely something to go and speak to your doctor about if you were suffering quite a bit. But from my, like, I was on the combined pill and stopped taking it earlier this year, and I feel that I definitely have a lot more of a mood swing now. But then I also don't know if I'm aware of it because I'm now tracking it. So that would just be something that, like, and everyone is so different. Like, some people won't even notice this at all. That's why I just definitely recommend, like, to try and get your clients to track how they're feeling in their cycle. Like, some people might not have this massive swing in how strong they're feeling. So in which case, if you're training someone, they're like, no, like, I feel fine, pretty easy going the whole way through. Or if someone is like, no, I literally, like, I'll be in a really shit mood. Yeah, I get really bad pains. I feel quite lethargic. Just knowing that around that week, you maybe might alter it, do something a bit easier, something they enjoy. So yeah, it's just so, like, individual, but that's why it's good to track and to get people, like, maybe use an app or even just in their calendar to, like, no, this day is awful, like, I've just cried all day. I had a day last month where I watched the new David Attenborough documentary, and I just cried. I cried the next day just thinking about it. I wasn't even watching it anymore, and I was like, this is definitely hormonal, because like,
it was pretty powerful stuff from David, I have to say.
I know, but like but like that, I was just thinking about it, and then I was like welling up. I was like, okay. So yeah, just but yeah, if I had a coach, I'd be like, I would say, by the way, I'm feeling a bit fragile, because if someone turned around and was like, oh, literally even like picking my squat part, like, oh, this wasn't looking great today, I'd probably start crying. And then so it's just yeah, I guess if your client, or if you are in tune with how you're feeling, and like how much your hormones do impact you, that's, yeah, just yeah, just to keep track of it.
No, definitely. I think it's not necessarily about becoming gynecologist or becoming an expert, medical expert in these things. I think you've already mentioned a couple of things there, just opening the dialogue about this, as an area to be interested in, as someone with a body, and and someone who goes through this on a kind of monthly cycle. It's like knowing a little bit more about it, taking an interest in it. If you have an interest, particularly if you have an interest in training, if you're training clients, obviously taking an interest in it so that you understand the body a bit better. And then, like you say, I think it's good advice, like tracking your own cycle, and just being comfortable with it helps. I think then if you do go to the doctors to talk about your pill or whatever, it's like at least you've got some knowledge of what you're talking about and you're aware of it and you're tracking it, so you can go into that conversation armed with it. And speaking to people about it as if it's a perfectly normal thing, I think is a good place for everyone to be in. Because I think staying quiet about it, being unsure, feeling like it's just you, feeling isolated, I think these are all things that are unnecessary and negative, and it can be solved. It's great. It's a great message. It's a great message.
The other thing as well that it speaks out quite a lot in the book that I'm reading is the reason why people should talk about it more is so people won't know what is normal or whether they're normal unless they have more of an understanding of what like normal or what regular is. So if no one talks about it and you are having these like horrendous mood swings, or if you're like having so much pain that you can't get out of bed that day, but you just think, because no one talks about it, you think that everyone has that and that's normal, but actually it's like that's not, and you don't have to go through these things. That's why it's important to, like, if my arm was hurting and like so bad that I couldn't, like one day it literally was like completely immovable and I was crying, I'd be like, oh yeah, my arm's doing this weird thing, like we'd talk about it, I'd say, oh yeah, like I don't know what's up, and I'd go and see someone. But yeah, because it's like a bit taboo and people are less open to talking about it, then people will go for longer with these things that might not be normal, or that they could get help with. So I just think it's really important. And like as a coach, if that's something that you could help to explain to someone and help with another area of their life which can impact a lot of things, then that's why I just think it's quite good to learn about. And I think it's really important. I've really enjoyed learning more about it.
Absolutely. I think also you touched on it there, like the point that everybody's different, has a different level of comfort talking about these things, and just being accepting of that, and knowing that if you've got to the point where you're comfortable talking about it, that doesn't mean that everybody else will have joined you on that journey. So then if you're talking about it really liberally and really openly, it might make people still feel very uncomfortable, whether that's right or wrong is indifferent. Like, it's just being aware. I think that some people still feel a bit like it is a taboo subject, and other people maybe coming out of the dark a little bit and seeing it's just the body and everyone's got one. And so we've talked about a little bit already, we've touched on the things it might impact, but I think the relevance of this to coaches is obviously why is it relevant to coaches in terms of the things that it can impact. Like, what have you read and what do you now understand of the ways in which this sort of cycle can affect, I guess, training things?
Well, I found so I did a blog post about this, and I'll just list like a few things that it can impact, and then the kind of main three that I've just picked out to talk about as a coach. But here's why it's important to learn about. So it affects your brain function, so your mood, cognition, and arousal levels. It can affect your cardiovascular system as well, so your heart rate, stroke volume, your respiratory system, your metabolic system, your strength, which we'll go into a bit more, your response to glucose and caffeine. It can affect your injury rate, your ligament laxity, and then your pain tolerance as well. So that's quite a few things that it can impact. So that's why it is important that you do have a bit more of an understanding about this. But the main areas, I think, as a coach to really understand the difference in strength during the different times that we spoke about. So if you were trying to get someone to go for a PB, then this would be a good one. So around the ovulation phase, but also if you're comparing if you're tracking someone's month by month, and you're like, well, your SCOT looks a lot higher then, like if you look at what phase that was in, like, oh, okay, yeah, you peaked on week 2, but then compare that week to like the next months, if that makes sense. So yeah, just having a bit more of an understanding, and then just know when to dial it back with clients if they are not feeling very strong, maybe not in the best mood. The next one is diet adherence. So if you're trying to get someone to start a diet, or like make changes to their diet, that might not be very easy for a lot of people. So trying to set someone up in the easiest time for that will be most beneficial. So diet adherence is easier within the first half of the cycle. So in your follicular phase, because your appetite is lower and your blood sugar levels are a lot more consistent. In your luteal phase, so in the second half, this isn't the case. Your body temperature increases, which means your BMR, your base metabolic rate, also increases. So how many calories your body needs increases, but it means you're a lot hungrier. So if you're already hungrier and you're trying to get someone to start a diet, so if you're already trying to put them on a 500 calorie deficit, and now their body during this phase is requiring 200-300 calories extra, that's then maybe like a 700 or 800 calorie deficit, and then they've got a lot of cravings. So straight away you're setting someone up in this phase where that's going to be really tough when they've got cravings. So it might be better to start in the follicular phase, where, so around menstruation, when someone is has less of these cravings, and either get a good start, so like, great, you've got 2 weeks and you're on it, and then perhaps even eating at maintenance in the luteal phase, and then just kind of doing that throughout the cycle. So in the first half, going a little bit more aggressive with the deficit, if that's what you're doing with a client, and then in the later phase, just eating at maintenance, or maybe like a little bit more reduced, just to help with adherence. So yeah, I just thought that was quite interesting. And then the last bit, and also weight fluctuation. So if you're working with a client and you're tracking someone's weight, if weight loss was one of their goals, this is like another reason to just be aware of where they are in their cycle, because weight fluctuations occur anyway. So one, I'd never just, if people are weighing themselves, I wouldn't just look at every Wednesday. I'd say try and do it a few times a week, and then we'll take an average of that week, because loads of things can impact that, like time of the day, if someone's gone for a big wee, what they've eaten, like how heavy that food is, if they're holding water, and water retention tends to be higher in the later stage of the cycle. So say if your client was doing really well, thought they were like smashing their training, and you'd weighed them like at the start of their cycle, and then they've been working really hard all month, and then you're like, okay, so we're going to do a weigh-in, and then you weigh them when they're bloated in that later phase, and their weight is maybe even increased or not, haven't lost as much as they'd wanted to, then they could feel, well, I've been doing everything, like I've been working really hard, and the results haven't been shown. So just being like, oh, okay, well, actually you should see, like you probably will see a bit of weight fluctuation during your cycle. So what we're going to do is compare your week 1 here with your next month's week 1, and then if you're weighing someone, does that make sense? So
yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so it's just like another thing to, if I weighed myself, like my weight fluctuates, I can go up like 1 or 2 kilos throughout the month, like quite regularly, and just being aware that maybe if you were weighing someone, doing a weekly average and then comparing that to the month previously, so having
from the same week throughout.
Yeah,
so
and then comparing
splitting it roughly into those four weeks or so, and actually treating each one of those weeks as a comparable one every month.
Yeah.
No, I think it's very, very interesting stuff, isn't it? Because it should immediately, for any coaches listening, it should like automatically transform the way they view, their programming with female clients. Should almost, I guess, because we mentioned at the beginning that everyone's different, and some people will experience all of these things to a great extent, and other females will experience, very few of these to a very small degree. So there's probably quite a lot of variance. So to the degree to which people now go away and, they go, right, we're not doing any heavy lifting in this week ever with every single female client, it's probably not equally, probably not the way to go. But at the same time being, particularly, I guess, if you're a male coach, just speaking from my point of view as a male coach, it's like knowledge is where that empathy will come from, because I can't experience that myself. So it places a great emphasis on talking to your client, opening up that dialogue about that, and then being aware that these things can happen, and I guess relying and making your decisions based on feedback you're getting from your athlete or from your client. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. In terms of, I know we said we would talk a little bit about athletic populations, and because I guess that's where the research gets done, right? The research gets done a lot of the time on athletes, or at least this is where it's, the smaller differences, the 1% improvements in performance count for an awful lot. What did you kind of find out that you said about more kind of athletic populations?
Well, quite interesting. I found out that first of all, that females weren't used in any, I think until the 70s, in any sports science research. And to be fair now, quite a few studies are done looking at men, because they don't have as much fluctuations. However, if that's happening to 50% of the population, maybe we should look a little bit more at how hormones would also impact certain things.
Yeah. Well, I guess also the number of female athletes has changed dramatically since the 1970s, doesn't it? I mean, before that, I guess there weren't a number of female athletes to really test and examine, and whereas now, of course, that's changed quite dramatically.
So just in female athletes, just how much the menstrual cycle is used as a marker to check that everything is going smoothly. So I spoke a little bit about, or just mentioned, amenorrhea, and that's when you can lose your menstrual cycle. I think you have to have not had a period for 6 months. But your body is quite clever in that if you're doing too much and it's under too much stress, it doesn't have any more to give out. So it's like, okay, we're not getting enough energy, or we're really stressed, because your period is there so you can, like, whether you want to or not, but like to have a baby. So if you're not giving yourself enough fuel, your body's like, there is no way that I'm going to have enough. Like, the last thing you need is a kid, because you're pretty stressed out, so we're not going to give you a period anymore. So that's,
I guess, it's like a sort of priority thing, isn't it? I guess there's a hierarchy of needs, and I suppose if you're evolutionary speaking, when these systems were designed or like evolved, that if you're not getting enough food or sustenance in, then the assumption is that do you have enough in your system to be able to actually expend extra energy on actually growing a new human?
Which
is unlikely, right? Probably priority.
And your body will spend a lot more trying to keep you alive and keeping your heart beating than to try and create a new person and then look after them. So because the body is quite clever and can do that, having your menstrual cycle is a good sign that you like that everything is going well. And regular menstrual, it's a good and it's a non-invasive method of just checking everything is going well. So coaches will use this with female athletes to check that things are going well, because if if people are high stressed, if they're not fueling themselves or over exercising, this is when your periods can stop. So yeah, from a coach's point of view, that's one method, as opposed to doing blood tests, just to make sure that everything is still running smoothly. Because I think a lot of people, so with athletes, they'll have someone looking at their nutrition, looking at how much they're sleeping and all this, but maybe someone that's not their full-time, somewhere where it's not their full-time job, and they're doing lots of exercise, they think they're fueling themselves, but on top of all of that they're doing, they've also got a full-time job, and maybe they're looking after kids, or they've got a side hustle, and so that they're taking on loads, they're training like an athlete, but that's where like the general population might have more stresses, because they've got quite a lot going on as well as trying to train like an athlete. So yeah, that's just one thing that I found quite interesting, how much the menstrual cycle is used just to check if training and nutrition and everything is going well as an athlete.
It's like the body's internal way of saying that, we're getting enough fuel and we're getting enough rest, and stuff is all good. It's really, I guess it's really interesting, isn't it? It's like kind of an extra layer perhaps, because obviously, with clients, I presume, we're sort of best off trying to gather information from lots of different sources. So, asking someone about their diet and how they're sleeping and their cycle, and, then looking at what numbers they're doing in their training sessions in terms of their lifts, or, the distances they're running or cycling or whatever activities they're doing. So you almost combining the information from lots of different sources to get a full picture of how someone is performing at the moment. And that should, that should certainly be a very important one of those many metrics.
Yeah, I guess if you were just looking at just focusing on someone's performance and not speaking about anything else, and you were looking at their lifts and being like, okay, well, this RP scale, this used to be like 7, you're saying this is now a 9, like the weight stayed the same or it's even dropped, what else is going on? Oh, okay, yeah, I'm not sleeping anymore, I'm super stressed, and this. So it's just like you could take one of those things and you can kind of guess what is going on elsewhere.
My kind of immediate thought now is that, it's really interesting how many things you're saying, how many things this affects. I think fascinating, what the research and practical coaching advice would be around how it impacts, performance and the impact that might have on how you program. I think all of that is, just so relevant, so important to females. But then there's this hurdle of like, how do you kind of talk to your client about it? If you've got a new client on, is that something that, you set the expectation right from the very beginning? Is that something, so you get someone in for a consultation and you say, right, let's talk periods.
This is where, it is, I guess, a bit more challenging. And there's certainly clients that I would find do speak a bit more openly about this. And I definitely feel that this is where I'd maybe have slight advantage being a female myself, because maybe it's slightly easier for women to open up. Maybe that's not the case for everyone. But that's what I feel, just having the knowledge first as a coach and knowing that it is important to know. And then explaining to your client why it's important. Or say the blog post that I wrote, like, it goes into detail of like how it's important, how it can affect your mood and your appetite and all these kind of things. If you go in and say, oh, And by the way, these, so your menstrual cycle is another thing, just like how you would talk about sleep or diet or rest and things like that. So, okay, and also your menstrual cycle can have an impact on your training. These are things that can impact, and then maybe point them into a direction of somewhere to, oh, okay, like maybe try read this, or give them a few pointers. And then when they are understanding, okay, that is actually quite important, then maybe they'll be more open to talking about it because they know the relevance, the importance. I guess that would be one way of doing it. I know what you mean. It's not like you could go in a bit too much, like,
I just think,
tell me what you're on.
Sometimes it's just expectation, isn't it? I think I find that, you know, if you talk to clients about what's happening in their life and what their job is, but their expectation was that you would talk about how many reps and sets of things they need to be doing, you need to be very good at being able to bridge that gap in conversation and say, the reason I'm asking these questions is because, you know, it's relevant to my programming process for you.
Yeah.
You're doing during the day. If I smash, you know, your legs for an hour, and then as a part of your, you know, build muscle program, and then you go and sit down at your desk for 8 hours, and you literally can't get away from the desk, you are going to need a wheelchair. Do you know what I mean? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put legs in 3 sessions. Yeah. Spread the workload across the 3 sessions, and then that's the reason why I'm asking. And I think particularly, I just listening to you talk there, particularly as a, you know, obviously if you're a female coach, you've got the angle of, I understand that this is relevant. It's relevant to my training. It just as much should be relevant to yours. So that's why I'm asking about it. And whereas as a male coach, I'm listening to you and going, I can't do that. So I kind of have to...
Here's an example. You could be like, well, oh, Kerry over here. So
Kerry was crying the other day, and I thought,
I threw a Snickers at her.
Yeah, from a distance.
Eat it.
I think, I guess it's comfort level as well, isn't it? How come, you know, I wouldn't feel too uncomfortable, but I would want to check the comfort level of my client, being a female client, me talking to her about it. So I would sort of go in by the goal and say, you know, you're obviously looking to lose weight. That's going to, you know, we're going to need to talk about diet. As a result of talking about diet, we also you need to be aware of the impact of these things. I'm happy to talk about them and then let you take that information and go and use it. We don't have to discuss it if you don't feel comfortable discussing it. I will just give you the information you need. And then obviously if they come back with questions, then we can talk about it. I think that's probably how I would handle it with.
And another thing too, just say, you could like guide them towards tracking, just as, okay, so like, well, if you're a coach that gets clients to track food, if you were setting someone up on MyFitnessPal, be like, oh, also this app is quite good. Or if you're getting someone to track how much water, how much sleep, and just being like, okay, so here's another thing that will have quite or like may have a big impact on how you're feeling, how, like all of these different things, maybe tracking this as well, just so you have a better understanding of what's going on in your body. Like even, I've learned so much about like what happens in my own body, and I feel more like, a lot more like empowered, and just having that understanding I think is quite cool, and like baffles me that it's taken so long to know that much about myself. And also quite, I don't know, when other people like, would say to me, oh, you on your period, or like, are you this, I'd be like, no, but I wouldn't. Sometimes I wouldn't even know, but that would just like annoy me. But now just being like, oh well, you know, yes, okay, and that's okay. I just think it's good. I think just like everyone, regardless of whether you're even into X, I tell like someone, like when I share this with my friends, I was like, regardless of whether you're into training, like I've written it from a perspective of how it impacts your training, but just like read this, and honestly all of them were like, how did I not know this? This is amazing. Like, I didn't know this, and this is just all information that I've learnt myself and then written about it because I found really interesting. but yeah, it's just amazing how much me and like loads of my friends didn't know, and just like, oh, this is really cool, I'm glad that I know this. So just for me telling my friends about this, like telling my clients, I know that all definitely have like well, it should have like a positive impacts on them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know it's sort of had that effect on me. You know, I'm kind of like thinking, you know, the female clients that I've got, I'm thinking, okay, I could probably approach this a bit differently, and you know, be something I could introduce that, you know, would only really strengthen the relationship I have with them, because they feel more understood. I feel more looked after. It wouldn't be an awkward thing. It would be something that they feel, I think that they, you know, have a more mature, capable coach on their side, not something that, you know,
and that's really what it should be, because you wouldn't be like, oh, by the way, how are you sleeping, like that, because it's not like, do you have an injury? It's just like, oh, okay. So if you make it into like a really big deal, then maybe clients would feel a bit more like, oh, it's awkward. Like, if you just go in and be like, okay, and also this, like, sleep can have an impact, hydration, how fatigued you are, and also your menstrual cycle does as well. So if you just, I don't know, maybe a bit more, it shouldn't be such a taboo topic. And I guess the more that people do start talking about it, and yeah, maybe it will be a little bit easier. I remember you said before, even just having like code words that your clients be like, oh yeah, it's a code red. Just like a.
Well, that's something that I, like I said, we spoke about it before, didn't we? And that just felt like a sort of natural thing that sort of emerged with me and one of my clients, was that, you know, it's not like she felt uncomfortable talking about it. It's just didn't really want to go into, you know, she didn't want to talk about it all the time. I don't think it's something she wanted to talk about all the time. It was occasionally she needed to mention it if things were not great. She wasn't tracking, so it wasn't like I could log into an app and see where she was and make a decision for her. So I think it just naturally emerged that she was like, I just said, oh, just go code red when we're on. And so she thought it was so funny. She was like, yeah, okay. And then in session she could be like, code red today, with, you know, and then I knew to back off a little bit with the intensity and change the session plan and let her take the lead a bit more. And that was all that was required. So it's not like we suddenly need to be having lengthy conversations with female clients about this stuff in depth. It's just finding a way of communicating and showing that you understand.
And also just how, so for people that do have cramps as well, sometimes I have like really bad stomach cramps, and exercise has been shown to help alleviate some of these pains, and not like super intense HIIT workouts, but even just something like going for a walk, or maybe doing some gentle yoga exercise or stretching like that can decrease your perception of pain and help alleviate some of the cramping. So if you do it from that kind of perspective, oh, and by the way, like this can be really beneficial. Here are a few workouts, even if you're not training with me, just try this thing. There's on YouTube, there's like yoga for period pains and things like that. It's just like, oh, also here's things that you can look at, a few stretches, and like try walking a bit more. This is quite helpful. So yeah, just if you come at it from a like, this is why it's important, this will be helpful for you, just like you would easily or speak about like nutrition or sleep or all those other things. If you just go in with like, this will be helpful, learn about it, and then I guess it hopefully will become a little bit less of a taboo subject and easier for people to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, I've enjoyed this massively. I think it's enormously sort of insightful, some of the stuff that you're talking about and you're thinking about, and I think the way you're thinking about it is, you know, feels like the right way to think about this topic. And I'd be amazed if there weren't, you know, every single coach that listens to this wouldn't think about at least one of their clients or the way that they're going to handle things now or in the future. I'd be amazed. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and learnings. If people, and I'm sure they will, want to learn more about this, they want to equip themselves with this kind of knowledge. I know you've already flashed the book up on the screen, but maybe we could get the book up on screen for it.
At the minute, I'm reading The Gyna Geek. This is by Dr. Anitra Mitra. Yeah, I just think this is a really good book. So I listened to a podcast with her on, like I said, I think it was the Food Medic podcast. And then also Dr. Stacey Sims. So on the Mighty Networks, I posted her TED talk that she did. And they're just two people that I've listened to a few podcasts with them on. And this book is amazing. It goes into like contraception, what's classed as a heavy period, and yeah, like regular absent. And yeah, I've just learned a lot so far just from reading this. And I actually read that after I wrote my blog piece, and I just went into PubMed and just did some research on like strength and your cycle, and I just found it quite interesting there.
And whereabouts can people find your blog post currently?
It is on, there's a link on my Instagram, which is coach.kerry, or it's just coachkerry.com.
Perfect.
And then, yeah, I've got a few blogs, and then, yeah, my latest one is just all about menstrual cycle and how it impacts. But I also post that in the Mighty Networks as well. So
yeah, so you'll be able to access those articles from Kerry's website, and also we'll post them up in the Six3nine Education app as well. So if you haven't headed over there already, and you're listening in on YouTube, do head over to the app. We'll put the link in the comments below, in the description below, so you can head over and add yourself onto there and read more of Kerry's articles, and also hit her up for a chat if you're interested.
Yeah, always happy to discuss things, or if like maybe people are not as confident about like how to talk to their clients, just like how maybe you can go about it, or just like a general discussion. I just think I find it quite interesting talking about it, and like I said, I think the more people do openly talk about these things, it is quite good. So yeah, always up for a chat.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you very much, Kerry, and thank you you guys for tuning in and listening along. I'm sure we'll be hearing some more from Kerry shortly, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys over on the app. And if you're already on the app, feel free to message Kerry and comment on the articles. Thank you very much. That's it for this episode of Six3nine Education Podcast. We'll be back next time. See you shortly. Thank you very much, Kerry.
Hi. We needed you.